Hello and welcome to The Resource, the podcast propelling employer brands to recruit smarter and retain better. I'm your host, Priscilla Peters.
And I'm your other host, Scott Dismuke. And Priscilla, it is that most wonderful time of the year. It is Christmas. I'm assuming all of your shopping is done. Or if you're like me, you've waited to the last minute and now you're kind of freaking out about what you're going to do.
Yes, that would be me. I feel like Christmas just crept up on us. Like it's been super warm here in the South. And literally while we're recording this, it's my air conditioner's on, I'll just say. So it doesn't feel Christmas-like to me.
Yeah, and we kind of got cheated out a little bit of Christmas season this year because we have, had the short window between Thanksgiving and Christmas, only 3 weeks since Thanksgiving was so late this year. So, yeah, it does feel kind of weird this year. I feel like on TV and everything kind of started Christmas early and, Thanksgiving kind of took a back seat. Like it seems to get worse and worse every year that Thanksgiving's kind of becoming the forgotten holiday. So, yeah, I've kind of had a tough time, I guess, kind of getting into the holiday spirit, if you will.
Yeah, my pastor at church on Sunday, he said, Thanksgiving's offended. Just so y'all know, those of you who have already put up your trees and all the things, like, because we are recording this right before Thanksgiving, but Thanksgiving's offended.
Yeah, and it just gets, yeah. I mean, it was crazy. I think I saw the first Christmas commercial this year, like even before Halloween.
Yeah.
So just super weird. So what kind of traditions do you guys follow every year?
Yeah, I mean, we're big Christmas morning folks. Like we're big, like I love my stocking. My stocking's my favorite thing. I always tell my husband, like, let's just fill a stocking. Cause I just feel like the stocking's where it's at. So we're big on stocking stuffers. The kids always think it's funny. I just always come up with some rando something to put in their stockings and they think it's funny. But that's kind of one of our traditions. I'm trying to think. I mean, other than that, it's, family time. Stella, my youngest, is she's very much a tradition person. Like we have to watch certain movies at certain times and drink our hot chocolate and all that. And she kind of drives that, which is fun. What about you?
Yeah, so we have a lot of family that lives in town with us, not with us, legitimately with us. But so my wife's family is all in Nashville. My mom is in Nashville. So we have multiple Christmases at the Dismuke house. One thing that we sat very early on after we had our son, of course, now it's a little bit different since he's away. Christmas morning, always at our house. And I remember the first year after he was born, we did like 4 Christmases on Christmas Day. And and that was after going to our Christmas Eve service at church the night before, which was legitimately at 11 o'clock. It finished at midnight. And then you have to go home and you have to be Santa. And you get like 2 hours of sleep. And we got in bed that first Christmas night, and I was like, never again. Never again. We got to spread these babies out. So we have Christmas morning is at our house. My mom is usually there. My mother-in-law is usually there. Obviously, our son will be home. And then we have a little bit of a downtime, and then we have my wife's side of the family. We always have big Christmas dinner at my mother-in-law's house on Christmas night. So those are kind of our big Christmases that we have. My sister is away. She lives out in California, so we usually do some FaceTime with her on Christmas morning to say hi to her and my brother-in-law and my niece. So yeah, I mean, just kind of chilling out. I will say that, and I don't know when this is actually going to drop, but there's been some discussions at our house, and we got to get this planned pretty quickly if it's going to happen. Obviously, my son turned 21 back in August, and we're thinking about, instead of doing Christmas for one another, all chipping in, Christmas will be going to Las Vegas after Christmas this year.
Okay.
In between Christmas and New Year, I do not want to be in Vegas on New Year's Eve. So we may do a couple of days out in Vegas so I can teach my son how to play blackjack.
Well, stay tuned.
Now that he's 21.
We will stay tuned for that. That'll be fun. One of the other things we do is we have quite the game night on Christmas Eve. We play games. There have been physical injuries before, over
You
board
don't play?
games, over
Do you
like
play Monopoly?
no, that's too.
Okay,
It
good.
takes too long. This has to be. We're talking like Taboo, Left, Right, Center, things like that. But I mean, it can get vicious. Like especially the Schrader side, like my side of the family, we are brutal, man. Like we're competitive. I know that shocks you, but it's pretty brutal.
Yeah. We're not big game people. Occasionally we'll do a puzzle every now and then, but as my son has gotten older, the puzzle has become less and less cool. So yeah, we're just not big game people. This is terrible. I shouldn't even say this, but I'm going to. Like the one game we play, and it's been a while since we played this, is Cards Against Humanity, which is really not a Christmas game. So
No, it is not, but it is hilarious. It
yeah,
is.
and so for the folks listening, if you haven't played it, I will apologize now. It's a terrible, awful,
It's very PG-13 ish and maybe
oh,
worse.
far worse, far worse. So that's now we don't play that with family. Okay, we will play a censored version with family, but we do not play. I could not play that game with my mom or with my mother-in-law. And my son is at the age where I could probably play it with him now, but yeah, that way too far.
We played it with our adult children at the beach one year, and it was the first time I'd ever played it, so I didn't really know what it was. And then as we got into it, I was like, "Whoa!" And then you realize your adult children know things. You're like, "Did I need to know they know that?" I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on. Here we go.
Yeah.
We go.
Yeah. So moving on real quickly before this really goes into the tank here. So on the resource, we start every episode with 2 must-know data points and resources that will keep you ahead of the curve in recruiting and retention. So Priscilla, what game-changing insights do you have for us this Christmas?
Yes, so I do have a data point. I may have talked about this a while back, maybe not in this exact way, but I do think this is important because we are definitely beginning to hear rumblings that, matter of fact, 2 media outlets this week have come out and said the freight recession's over. Like, officially have said that. Now, I'm not saying I definitely am in that camp that but we are hearing rumblings. Things are starting to kind of show signs that that is the case. So I just want to kind of give you some data, remind you of some data. So one of the things to keep in mind is many carriers during this freight recession that we have just experienced that was much longer than typical. They cut their recruitment, marketing, and advertising budget significantly. And listen, I completely understand that. You didn't have the driver needs that you needed, but here's what I will tell you. When we go back and look at the historical data of when this has happened in the past, keeping in mind the freight recessions in the past were much shorter. This one was longer. We don't have one on record since we've been keeping data that was this long. So these numbers are probably going to be more inflated because of that, just to be honest. But if you cut more than 40% or more of your recruitment advertising budget, here's what we know based on the historical data. This is just like high level benchmark for something for you to think about. It's going to take you, once you ramp back up, maybe your spend isn't exactly where it's going to be. It's not necessarily won't have to be because of technology and things like that, which we'll get into that as we get into some of these questions that you guys sent in. But on average, you're looking at about 8 months before you're going to get your application volume back to where it was pre-slowdown. And you're looking at about 12 months before you're going to get your hires back. Again, this is a super high level average, but something for you to think about as you begin to ramp up your driver needs, your recruiting needs. And a lot of folks are saying, oh, I'm just going to hang back during the holidays and I'm going to, and I know we talked about this on last episode. Listen, this is not the time to do that. You need to start ramping up now. And I literally said this in a meeting. I just got out of a meeting and I said this. Some of our account executives are saying, wow, we're hearing from clients much more often than we were. And I said, there's a lot of folks that are getting their doors knocked on, that their door hasn't been knocked on in 2.5 years. And they're saying, guess what? Are we ready? Here's some things we see coming down the pike. We really feel like we're going to need more drivers for this new account or that new account, or, oh, now this contract is, we're going to get this many more loads than we had before, so we're going to need more drivers. Recruiting leaders' doors are starting to be knocked on, and they haven't been in a while. And so the real question is, and we'll kind of get more into this with some of the questions that we got from you guys, but is your driver pipeline ready? How did you cut? If you did cut, and how do you need to plan for that? And so I would just say the next 8 to 12 months are going to be super critical if you significantly cut your advertising and marketing budgets when it comes to recruitment advertising.
So I love it when we never discuss our data point beforehand, right? And so I love it when we kind of have something that kind of goes hand in hand. And when we did the survey on our last episode, if you haven't listened to it, you need to go back and listen to it. There's some good data in there. One of the things that I think I said on that episode, one of the things that I've been saying to some of our partners and had a meeting this morning and had the same conversation is I believe that as the economy does come back, which, like you said, there's evidence that is starting to happen. I'm of the belief we are going to see turnover go up and we're going to see churn like we haven't seen in the last couple of years, obviously, since probably pre-COVID. I think that because some of the data is telling us that, and I think that because I think drivers have been relatively patient throughout this down cycle. But like you said, that has lasted a lot longer, and the data is showing us that I think some of that patience is wearing thin. So one of the questions that we asked on the survey was, are you earning more now as a truck driver than you did a year ago? And almost 60% of the drivers said, no, they are not. Now, when you combine that with the 41% of the drivers who said they were currently looking for a job, and then you combine that with the 21% of drivers who said they're waiting for the economy to improve, that gets you almost 60%. I firmly believe, and I, this obviously goes into what we do, that folks had better be ready for the recruiting. Like you said, there's going to be companies that are getting ready, that are filling their pipelines, that they really haven't been all that aggressive in doing that. Be ready because it's coming. Be ready because I think the drivers are antsy. I think the drivers are ready to look. I think they're going to be looking at advertisements. They're going to be looking at what we know from the data, which is they want predictable pay. So a lot of those advertisements that are talking pay, they're talking predictable pay, they're talking predictable miles. It's going to be very easy to sway them. And so just know that 60% of the drivers out there don't feel they're not making as much as they were a year ago. And we know a year ago wasn't any good either. So if they're already not making more than they were a year ago, we kind of know where that's headed. So that's kind of my data point. It's not very joyful and cheerful for this time of year, but it's coming.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's going to be really interesting a year from now when we get to the end of 2025 and we see like what came out of the year. So it's going to be interesting, but good stuff. Very, very good stuff. Okay. Well, we have a special episode today. This is going to be so fun. This episode is all about you, the listeners, the viewers that we have. We are diving into the industry and some holiday questions that you sent our way. This is really your time to shine as our listeners and our viewers, and we're super excited to kind of unpack some of the questions that you guys sent us. But before that, let's hit our final mile first 5, sponsored by Driver.jobs, your destination for hiring the drivers you need for your final mile operations. Driver.jobs, matching the right drivers with the right opportunities for every last mile. Now, normally we would have a guest, Scott, and we would do a first 5 and we would ask them some silly questions to get to know them, but we don't have a guest today because we're taking our listeners and viewers' questions today as for this holiday episode. So I have a question for you. We have some questions for us. This is First 5 Christmas Movie Debate Edition. Okay?
Yep.
The first one is, I'm laughing because Okay, I'll tell you why in a minute. Miracle on 34th Street or It's a Wonderful Life? Which one?
This one is extremely easy for me. It's a Wonderful Life every day of the week and twice on Sunday. I watch it every year. This is something that my mom and dad got me hooked on when I was a kid, and I will just admit every single time I watch it, and it's usually on NBC like the first Saturday of December, I think. If you haven't watched it, you have to watch it. It's a feel good movie, unlike any movie. Jimmy Stewart, fantastic. But I will tell you the last scene, it gets me every Christmas. Every time we watch it, my wife and my son will both turn and look at me so they can see the tears well up in my eyes. I will admit it every time. It is hands down, in my opinion, the best Christmas movie out there.
Yes, I agree. I agree. I think it would be interesting to ask younger generations if they're familiar with it. Because I feel like we were kind of raised on it. Like it was our elf, if you will, right? Or our
Yeah.
Home Alone. But I don't know if I don't know if my kids have seen it. Like honestly, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, just the message in it. I mean,
Yeah,
it
it's
just
great. So good.
it's a great movie. It stands the test of time. So it's to me, it's a Wonderful Life, and then everything else is after that.
Yes.
So moving to the next one, Home Alone or Elf.
Okay, I have to tell you something so funny. Literally last night, I saw on social media a meme, and it had like the Home Alone. You could tell it was about the Home Alone movie, and it said, "Just so you know, Home Alone was launched 34 years ago, which is the equivalent to in 1990 is when Home Alone came out." Oh my gosh, that made me feel so old. And then it said it's equivalent to something that in 1990 our parents would have told us about that came out in 1956. So
Jeez.
so that's I know.
That was a fact I could have done without.
I was like, what is actually happening? But to answer your question, I love Home Alone. I loved Home Alone when it came out. But I'm going to tell you, I'm not sure it gets much better than Elf. I'm not going to lie. Like, I freaking love Elf. I will watch it. I can watch very few movies over and over. I can watch it over and over. I love it that much.
Yeah, that movie was made for Will Ferrell. And you and I are going to 100% agree on this one, too. I do like Home Alone. I think Home Alone is funny. But I think the older you get, the less funny Home Alone is. But Elf, again, it stands the test of time. And Will Ferrell is fantastic in that movie. So, yeah, there's three movies that I must watch every Christmas. It's a Wonderful Life, we've already discussed. Elf was the second one, and we'll talk about the third one here in a second.
Yeah. Well, okay. So there's a documentary, and I don't know, on one of the streaming services about the making of Elf and and it's interesting because they talk about how there was a big argument and debate over whether Will Ferrell could carry that movie or not. And that is hysterical to me. But he wasn't who he is today then. But anyway, the next one is Polar Express or How the Grinch Stole Christmas.
Yeah, so I'm going to make some people mad here. I'll be honest with you, I've never seen Polar Express.
I don't think you're missing anything. I have, and
yeah, I'm going to kind of go against probably the spirit of the question here and say neither, and tell you the other one that I will watch every Christmas, and this will come as no surprise to you, is Christmas Vacation. I must watch Christmas Vacation. So on this question, I'm going to say neither, and I'm going to throw my own in and say Christmas Vacation.
Okay, so I might do the same. Now, I will watch Grinch. Polar Express, I've seen it, but that's just because my kids used to watch it. But I'm going to tell you one that's not on this list that is literally might be my favorite Christmas movie, and it's Four Christmases. I think, did we talk about this last year?
Yeah, we did, and I have to agree with you. It is a very underrated Christmas movie.
It is. Vince Vaughn is hysterical. The scene where the baby throws up on him is literally liquid gold, in my opinion. But anyway, it's a great movie for sure.
Yeah. So this last one, I do think we talked about this last time, and it's worth bringing up again because it is a debate. And I will tell you, I may have changed my stance on this since last Christmas. And the question is Die Hard a Christmas movie? And so I think I remember where you stood on this. I don't remember, maybe.
I don't know if I remember where I stood on it. I don't really have an opinion either way. I mean, my gut says no, but just because it's set during Christmas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it has all the makings of a Christmas movie. It's set at Christmas. The rolling credits at the end it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas. Everything, minus the blood, guts, gun violence, all of that stuff, it points to a Christmas. Here's the one reason why it's hard to say that Die Hard is a Christmas movie, is part of it being a Christmas movie is when did it come out? And I think I remembered doing a little bit of research on this, and Die Hard came out in July.
Yes.
So it's really, really hard, in my opinion, to convince me that it's a Christmas movie if it didn't come out at Christmas time. If it had come out in October or November, I would be like, yep, it's got to be a Christmas movie. So that's kind of where I fall on it. But I love that argument. It makes my wife crazy because she will make all the arguments for her, and I will play devil's advocate and argue with her.
That's fair. That's fair. Well, enjoy your Christmas movies. If you haven't seen Four Christmases, go check it out. That's really what we're saying here.
Yeah, exactly. So let's get into this. As Priscilla said, this episode is really about you guys. We said at our last episode that we were going to be answering some questions, and we got a lot of stuff in. So we had to spend some time kind of deciphering through and going through and figuring out, kind of the best thing. Otherwise, this podcast would have been much longer than probably most of you would care to listen to it. And so we kind of went through there. We pulled some questions as it relates to recruiting and retention. And then we had a couple of questions that were kind of fun based on what Priscilla and I have, I guess, now spent almost a year and a half doing this podcast that some folks wanted to know. And so we've got like 6 questions here, I think. So we'll kind of get into that. But I think the first question, and this was one that several people actually asked, and I thought it was kind of fun, is do we hang out together outside of recording this podcast?
Okay, so let's tell them like the history. So we knew each other, but we didn't like know each other. I feel like when we decided to do this podcast, we knew each other, but just professionally, really. I mean,
yeah.
I knew you were really smart when it came to retention. And then when we started the podcast, we really got to know each other better. I don't remember. Well, the answer to the question is yes, as much as we can, because you live in Nashville. I live in Little Rock. I'm trying to think of the first time that like you introduced me to Dion and I introduced you to Kobe. Are we saying our spouses' names? I don't know if we are, but I think it's fine. But we've all hung out a lot.
Yeah. Well, I think the first time you met Dion, we went to dinner together one of the times that you were here.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right.
And then Kobe, we went to the Razorback game together. So we've done football games together. We've done some tailgating together before some Razorback games. We're trying to convince my better half to like basketball the same way she likes football. That is a little more difficult. So we've got to get her to Bud Walton so she can experience a basketball game. So we're trying to arrange that. And then I think it was it may have been when we moved my son back in this past summer as we were driving back through from Fayetteville to Nashville. We stopped and met you for lunch in Little Rock. So yes, we do. We do spend a lot of time talking work, but we have cut some time out to spend some time together outside of the office, and it's usually around some kind of a sporting event or around food or pregame festivities, we'll call it.
No one would be surprised at any of that. I do not think so, but no, we do, and we have really become good friends through the podcast too. So it's kind of been fun. So yeah, that's fun.
Yep, there you go.
All right, question number 2. It says, you're both big sports fans. If you could go to one sporting event, money is not an obstacle, which I love that little caveat they threw in there. What would you go to? Sporting event?
Yeah, so I have been fortunate enough to go to a World Series game when I was like 11. I went to game three of the 1987 World Series in St. Louis. So I kind of marked that off of my list. If money is not an option, and I think we talked about this a little bit, I'm a bit of a tennis fan. I played tennis in college. If money is not an object, and I could go to any sporting event, I would want to go to the finals at Wimbledon in London.
Okay.
That is something I would probably mark off the list. Obviously, it would be a little more pricey. You've got the trip across the pond, and I'm sure tickets to Wimbledon are not cheap. I obviously would love to go to a Super Bowl. That just kind of seems like the easy answer, and obviously those tickets are expensive. But I think if I wouldn't have any trouble convincing my wife to go to London. So I think if I had it my way, I would go to the finals at Wimbledon.
Yeah. So, I mean, definitely the low hanging fruit, like you said, is Super Bowl. But like, if money's not an object, I would want to go VIP status to the Super Bowl. Like, I would want to have the pre party tickets. I would want the post party tickets. I would want great game day tickets, all the things. I remember when I was a kid, my dad went to the 1985 Super Bowl where the Bears played the Patriots. And my dad had a good friend that played for the Bears. And the pictures they had, like, they had the best time. And I remember when I was a kid, I didn't even know what they were doing. I just knew mom and dad were gone. But they had so much fun. So that I would say that. But the other one would be, and I know this sounds crazy because I do not follow soccer, but have you ever watched a World Cup match?
Yeah, watch it on TV for sure.
The fans are my thing is I love a sporting event where I can experience like my most memorable, like I could tell you the top most memorable sporting events that I've ever been at, and it's always been like something crazy that's happened or like mostly related to the Razorbacks, unfortunately. But I mean, some of them are good. Seven overtimes, things like that that you just literally do not forget. But that's a good question. I think I like that people, you know, they notice we like sports.
Yeah, we clearly talk about sports. We clearly talk about sports. So, okay, so I have a serious one here, work related now.
Okay.
So this one's for you. In your opinion, what are some of the biggest myths or misconceptions about driver recruiting today?
Oh, myths or misconceptions. Listen, don't know if you've heard, but there's a little debate over whether or not there's a driver shortage. And I know that's for a whole different day, but clearly we have opinions on that. But there's lots of debate kind of going down over that because of a recent,
Interaction.
study that
Yeah.
interaction, yeah, that's come out. So we'll just leave it at that. But okay, myths or misconceptions. Here's a couple things. I think within carriers, within organizations, sometimes people use the J word too much. And when I say J word, I mean just like, oh, just go hire some drivers. You know, oh, it's just recruiting's job. Like they just need to hire more drivers. People kind of throw out what I would call the J word, and I think we've got to be really careful with that because it can be complicated depending on where you're hiring, what type of driver you're hiring. Some other kind of myths and things that I would think about would be like people saying, I just need phone calls. Just give me as many phone calls as you can get me. Well, today there's a pool of drivers that they're more interested in using technology. And I'm not saying you won't eventually get them on the phone, but it's probably going to look a little bit different on how you get there to the phone call. And a lot of recruiters still prefer the phone call, which I'm not saying the phone call's dead. I'm just saying you have to be kind of open to like technology. So that would be one. The biggest one that we run into is people who have been doing it a long time, who've been recruiting drivers for a long time. And this whole idea of we've always kind of done it this way. Like, oh, you're saying technology does this now? Well, we've always done it this way and we've been successful. I'm sure you've been successful. What if you tried the technology and just saw the impact that it could make on your team, on your processes, on, I mean, I think this whole myth of like, we've always done it this way and this is the best way, maybe not necessarily. I've heard some people like, I mean, if I'm speaking at a conference, being a marketing person, I almost always mention the driver lead funnel. And if you could just see, if I had $1 for every eye roll that I've ever gotten, where it's like, oh, okay, the marketing person talking about the driver lead funnel, let me zone out on this. Listen, driver lead funnel is not a myth. Like, I can show you data after data after data. Carriers who actually invest in all the entire funnel perform much better than those who are like, just give me leads, give me leads, give me leads. I'm not going to do anything with my employer brand. The data is behind it. So those are some that just kind of top of mind, come to my mind. So did I mention, is there anything I didn't mention that you could think of?
No, I mean, you covered it far better than I would, for sure. I mean,
okay.
Recruiting's your baby.
So here's a retention kind of question that we got that's good for you. It says, based on your experience, what's one thing that you think companies do wrong or right or wrong when it comes to retention?
So I could probably spend way too much time on this. Just kind of boil it down from what do they do right? Proactive communication with drivers. Instead of waiting, I had a conversation with a carrier this morning, does exit interviews, and they like the data from the exit interviews, but as they put it, a postmortem is great, but it doesn't necessarily keep a driver in the truck. I think that those companies that have a plan of proactive communication, of reaching out to the drivers to check on them, to see how they're doing, and more importantly, allowing them to, and you've heard me say this a lot, quickly identify and quickly intervene. As we've talked on this pod several times, one thing that is not your friend when it comes to the retention game is time. We talked about it on the last episode with how many companies drivers are applying with when they're actively looking for a job. It is no friend when it comes to a time standpoint. So you have to be able to identify your drivers that are having issues. You have to be able to identify, and you have to be able to intervene to fix those problems, because we know that they're going to be hearing, because they already are, whether they're actively looking for a job or not. We know that they're hearing from other carriers. So I think that those carriers that are proactively communicating with their drivers, or have a plan, or have someone, whether it's somebody like a third party like us, or doing it internally, you're going to have a much better chance at saving the driver when you know who the driver is that's having the problem, and you can address or fix that problem as quickly as possible. Probably the thing that is the biggest thing that they don't do right is those companies that get some sort of driver feedback data and then do nothing with it. The worst thing you could possibly do is ask a driver for their feedback, collect the data, and then don't do anything with it, because then you're telling that driver your opinion doesn't matter. Now, their opinion may not be right? But if you have multiple drivers saying the same thing, and you don't do anything to act on it, or to tell them what is going on, or tell them what you're doing with their feedback, then they're going to think, hey, why am I even giving the feedback if they're not going to do anything with it? So if you're collecting data, if you're getting data from your drivers and it's their feedback, and you're just sitting on that and you're not taking that and doing something with it, then you're not going to continue to get data. They're going to quit telling you how they feel. And then you're probably going to have some turnover, because you're clearly not listening to what they're saying and doing something about it. So those that are proactively communicating are doing it right. Those that are not taking the information and doing something with it are probably missing an opportunity, we'll say. I'm not going to say they're wrong, but they're missing an opportunity.
Yeah. No, I think that you hit the nail on the head there.
Okay. Well, good. Hopefully that answered the question that person asked. So here's one for you. Let's see. What practical actions can I take to help my recruiting team succeed in 2025?
Okay. Much like you, I could probably spend a lot of time on this one. I would say focus on maybe, I mean, I'm just trying to think, like four things kind of come to mind for me. Number one is understand and know your goals. Like, I cannot tell you how many times we'll sit down with a carrier and they'll be like, we really need help with our recruiting. Well, tell me about your goals. How many drivers do you need to hire? Where do you need to hire them? How many, if you know that's how many you need to hire, how many does that mean you need an orientation every week? How many, like back into your numbers, understand what your goals are. Make sure everybody does understand that. Your recruiting team, your C-suite, everyone should understand what your goals are. And then after you get your goals, make sure you actually have a plan. So you got goals and you got a plan. I mean, again, we'll sit down with people, tell us what's your current, recruiting strategy? Like, what's your plan today? Well, we use 10th Street, we use some job boards, or we're on our Indeed and we're on 10th Street. Like, we use 10th Street for our ATS, let's just say. And it's like, okay, but what's your full marketing plan? What's your recruiting strategy? What's your message model? What do your driver personas look like? There's a lot of elements to that plan that you've got to know and understand to set your team up for success. And then after you have the plan, you've got to be like, okay, and some people have their goals, they have their plan, but then it's like, do you have the assets to like go out and execute that plan? Do you have the technology? Do you have the actual assets? Like, sometimes we'll sit down and we'll say, okay, we want to do what we call a search engine marketing interactive, SEM interactive strategy for you. We're going to need some specific assets. And they will send us pictures that are like from 1985 or some, they're old. You can tell they're old pictures. And I'm like, can we come out and do a quick photo or video shoot for you and just grab some new assets for you to use in your campaigns? Like, you've got to use, I mean, especially today in the digital world, like, set your team up for success by having a good asset library. I mean, if you have a good asset library, and that's for any brand, that's for your organization in general, that's for anything you're promoting. You need an asset library. You need photos, you need videos, you need, a brand guideline. There's things that you need. Again, I know I'm the marketing person, but that's another thing that could just really kind of set you up for success. And then you've got to really understand your data. So you can have a plan, you can have all these goals and a plan, you can have like best photos and videos. And if you execute and you do all these campaigns to get drivers and you don't understand where you're getting your leads from or where you're getting your hires from, it's not even going to matter. So the data is like super, super critical. So I would say, like, if you're going into 2025 and you're like, oh my gosh, where do I start? Start with your goals. Make sure you have a plan in place. Make sure you're using the right technology. Make sure you have the right assets, and then make sure you have a good strategy in place for how you're going to grab the reporting, understand what your KPIs are, understand what's working from what sources, and all the things. I mean, that's really how I would set a team up for success next year.
Well, and I think, as you mentioned earlier, next year is going to be very critical as things begin to shift around. So I think that advice is probably not only spot on, but very timely.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it is interesting how much people spend on recruitment marketing, and then some of these things are not in place. And so it's just really, really important. Okay. Last question is for you, my friend. If you were in a room full of trucking company CEOs, which we know we have some that listen here, so technically you kind of are, what's one piece of advice that you would give them when it comes to driver retention?
A loaded question. Yeah, so I think there's a couple. I know it says one, but I think I'm going to say a couple things here. I think the first thing, and I think this is something that really has come to light, at least from our standpoint during the freight recession, is how few people understand how much turnover is costing them. We talk a lot, you talk a lot about what that cost per hire is, but losing a driver is more than just that cost per hire. There are other factors involved in that number. What is that cost per loss? And it's not a set number. I mean, that number is going to kind of float a little bit depending on several variables. But this is something that we've spent a lot of time researching and looking into and asking executives across the country. And what are some of the things that go into that? Obviously, what you talk about, the cost per hire and the marketing cost and recruiting costs that come to bring in a new driver. You've got some equipment costs, whether it's to prep the truck for a new driver or to potentially recover the truck if that truck was abandoned. You've got lost revenue. There's just so many things that come into play with that. And why is that important? Well, it's important because I will tell you, one of the things we've seen over the last 24 months is how few people have invested in retention during this downturn. And I get that to a point, but that problem with a cost per loss, it does not show up on a P&L. It does not show up on a P&L statement. So it's really kind of hard to pinpoint that. And that's something that we are encouraging all of the folks that we work with is to understand, what is this costing me, aside from just my recruiting costs to fill that truck after that driver leaves. There's potentially a brain drain there when if you've got 10 more drivers leaving, drivers that have been with you 3, 4, 6, 10 years, there's a whole retraining process that's going to have to go into that's going to affect customer service, the wear and tear on your truck with a new, less experienced driver. I mean, there's all kinds of things that go into that. And our conservative estimate right now is it costs anywhere between $10,000 and $12,000 on the low end to lose one driver. So if we can reduce turnover by even just 5%, how much money is that saving you? And when you get into an economic downturn like that, that retention of that fleet, the retention of those drivers does not need to be looked at as a cost at that point. It needs to be looked at as a savings. And so the first thing I would probably tell them is know what your cost per loss is, spend some time and dig into that, because it is I will just tell you, in looking at what average turnover is for the industry, it's costing you far more than you think it is to lose just one driver. So that's the first thing. And I think the second thing I would probably tell them is make sure you understand how important your equipment is to retention. And we see this all the time where equipment problems, and you've heard me say this probably 47 times if you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, equipment issues from our data we've seen are the only issues that cascade into other problems. And the big one is compensation. And what we've seen is drivers that are having recurring or multiple breakdowns, it then affects their miles, which then affects their pay. And then the other side of that is the condition of the truck for a new driver that you just invested a lot of money in to bring in to your organization. What do your trucks look like when you're assigning them to those drivers right out of orientation? The very worst thing you could do is hand the keys over to a driver right out of orientation, and the driver gets out there and the truck is filthy. It has the previous driver's belongings still in them. The check engine light is on. Any of those types of things where that driver immediately has to go into the shop before they can start making money. We have seen drivers are twice as likely to leave if they have an equipment problem right out of orientation than if they don't. And so those equipment issues are really a big deal when it comes to retention. So those are probably the two things that I would say is know your cost per loss and understand how important equipment is to the retention of your drivers.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff. That's good stuff. Well, this was fun.
Yeah, we'll have to do this again.
Some questions. Yeah, we'll go. And listen, if you have a question anytime that you want to ask us, like our emails are in the show notes. You can check that out there. But thanks for tuning in to this holiday special. If you enjoyed it, give us a little holiday cheer by leaving a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to hit that subscribe or follow button. It's the gift that keeps giving all year long, Scott.
A little Christmas vacation quote to close the year on. It's fantastic. Like Priscilla said, if you've got questions or feedback, you can reach out to us on social media or drop us an email in the email address in our show notes. And we just want to wish you a joyful holiday season filled with love, laughter, and maybe a little extra eggnog. And of course, really solid recruiting numbers, really solid retention numbers. But we want to thank you for being a part of this community. We thank you for listening and tuning in and subscribing. And we can't wait to we get to 2025 so we can share some more insights and some takeaways with you as we go into next year. So from Priscilla, from myself, from PDA, from Conversion, we want to wish you Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and hope for a blessed 2025. You all have a great Christmas.